This is a story of Jack and Karen, both seasoned poker players who decided to pit their wits and skill at the poker tables here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Both of them skilled players, but as you'll find, the chips fell differently and their fortunes were very different. In the world of No Limit Hold'em, where a single hand could make or break you, Lady Luck smiled upon Jack. A favourable sequence of returns propelled him forward, steadily growing his chip stack. On the flip side, Karen faced challenging hands and unfortunate draws, struggling to stay afloat despite her skill. As the tournament unfolded, Jack soared with favourable returns, securing a commanding chip lead at the final table. In contrast, Karen, with her poor sequence of returns at the start of the tournament, faced an uphill battle. In the climatic duel, the cards were dealt, and no sequence of returns played out on the table. Jack, riding the momentum of favourable hands, seemingly unstoppable, while Karen fought against that unkind sequence of returns. In a bold move, Karen went all in, hoping for a turnaround. The crowd held its breath as the cards revealed an unfortunate outcome. Despite Karen's skill, that early bad sequence of return led to her defeat, with Jack emerging victorious, partly due to his early wins. So this story of Jack and Karen is a salient reminder of the risk in any kind of investment, not just at the poker table. And sequence of return is something that impacted Karen, and it can impact you too in your retirement investment. And that's exactly what this video is all about. To Go Roam viewer contacted me a few weeks ago and wanted to share a video by a guy called Dave Ramsey. Seems he's a bit of a household name here in the US. If you're from the UK, he gives a similar type of advice than you get from Martin Lewis, the money savings expert. Now, I checked the video in question. I've got to say, I was genuinely shocked by what I saw in the video and what Dave Ramsey was recommending. If you took his advice, your retirement fund would become a train wreck. And just like in that story I told about poker, your chips won't just be down. You'll be out of the tournament of life for good. And the thing is, I don't know this Dave Ramsey guy. It might well be that he was just having a bad day, but in this video, he was extremely angry and wasn't taking kindly to any kind of differing advice to the things that he thinks are correct. Just listen to this. Does this sound like the words of a measured financial guy who you would take advice from?
Well, there's a lot of studies that are stupid in this space. All these goobers out there have always put this 4% crap in the market. Stupid people put out low withdrawal rates with these morons who live in their mother's basement with a calculator. You're going to have ruby red slippers sometimes, and sometimes you're going to have flying monkeys stealing them. $1 million should create for you an $80,000 income, boys and girls.
So what I want to do is actually put his plan to the test. I'm going to head back to my hotel room here in Las Vegas because, to be honest, walking around Las Vegas doesn't feel like the right place to be giving people sound financial advice. That's better, away from the craziness of Las Vegas. Now, basically, Dave Ramsey had a caller into his show that was interested in the concept of drawdown. And during the conversation, he introduced the 4% rule, which is kind of widely recognised as the default that people start as they talk about their retirement savings. But that seemed to send Dave Ramsey a little bit crazy.
Super nerds that have never really done anything to start with. They don't have any investments, they just have theories. I've actually freaking got investments.
I have two issues with Dave Ramsey and the advice that he's provided in this video. The first one is that he speaks in absolutes. That is to say that he says, for example, the S&P 500 returns 12% and the historic inflation figure has been 4%. So 12% minus 4% means you can remove 8% forever. Perpetually.
$1 million should create for you an $80,000 income, boys and girls. So you should, perpetually. Like, if forever.
He even states that he would be perfectly comfortable removing 8%. And he says that the math is the math. Now, for our UK viewers, a quick translation, what he means there is the maths is the maths.
So I'm perfectly comfortable drawing 8. Listen, man, the math I just gave you is the math.
Now, as I go through this, I'm going to be sharing a spreadsheet, and it's going to be very, very detailed. Do not worry. If you already receive our newsletter, then next week I'll be giving you this spreadsheet for free. If you're not signed up to our newsletter, then if you look in the description below this video, there's a short form for you to fill in. Just need your name and email address, and you can get access to this too. And also in making this, I'm playing into Dave Ramsey's hands a little bit because he doesn't like nerds who sit in their basement with a calculator. I know I'm sat on the 30th floor of the Park MGM in Las Vegas, but I think I'm fitting into the category he's talking about. I'm using a calculator. And as he speaks about in this video, basically I think what I'm about to hit you with is what he calls bogus math. And he also states people that share this kind of information I'm about to do now are super nerds and people who haven't really done anything. And that people like me don't actually have investments, I just have theories. He's got actual freaking investments.
I've actually freaking got investments.
Funny thing is here, so if we take me as an example, I do have investments. I have done something. I don't think I'm a super nerd. When I say I've done something, Sarah and I, we retired early 3 years ago and have been living off our investments ever since. And in this video that we're responding to here, Dave Ramsey actually confirms he's being theoretical because he doesn't draw down on any of the investments that he's talking about. He's the guy who's being theoretical, not me.
Like, I'm 62, or 63, I'm pulling nothing off of mine.
Right.
Because I don't need it.
And look, I have no axe to grind with Dave Ramsey. I don't even know who he is, to be honest. I wouldn't have seen this video had one of our viewers not told us about it. However, he seems to be hell-bent on having an argument with anyone that wants to do maths or take an issue with his approach to drawdown. And in this video, as I say, he seems very angry. I'm sure normally he's a lot more measured than this. If you're providing financial advice, doing it being angry probably is not the best approach, and people are not likely to listen to that, I imagine. So I would ask Dave Ramsey, if you're watching this, I'd like you to do a reaction to that video and to say, yeah, I was a little bit hot-headed. Now let me give you a bit of colour, because for me to produce this video, you haven't produced any data in that video for me to really go on. So I'm having to really mix the numbers up because the way you presented it was a little bit mixed up. So without further ado, let's go into the numbers. If this doesn't make sense, as I say, if you're signed up to our newsletter, I'm going to send this spreadsheet out to you for free. It's got S&P data going back to the 20s. It's got inflation data going back to the 1920s as well. So you can do your own assessment on what he said and maybe what I'm talking about and assess on your own plans. So I've created a number of tabs here. Across the bottom, you'll see the raw data. That's the stuff you can play around with. Ramsey's data, Ramsey's world static, Ramsey's world increase, and then comparing. I've also put a message on screen saying that, interestingly, I don't support the 4% rule. At the end of this video, I'm going to link to a video where I say the 4% rule is actually flawed and what you could do potentially instead. But as Dave Ramsey says in the video, the S&P 500 provides a return of 12% per annum. And you might take an issue with me saying that, but there's a point in this video, in fact I'll insert it here, where he does talk as though it's an absolute given.
I mean, if you're making 12 in good mutual funds and the S&P is average 11.8, and if inflation for the last 80 years is average 4%, if you make 12 and you need to leave 4% in there for inflation raises, that leaves you 8.
Because he states that we're only 10 months through the year of 2023 and it's already at 10% and the year hasn't finished yet. So his inference there is it's guaranteed to hit 12%. So that's the number he's talking about.
This year, the S&P to date
was 10%.
Is 10%, and we're not even at the end of the year yet.
Yeah.
And everybody's talking about how bad the economy is. So, most years, mine have done much better than 12.
And I've taken a 30-year retirement, which is what people normally speak about, and applied his 12% right the way through. He also states that inflation is 4%, so I'm going to say it's 4% every year, and he's talking about a drawdown that you can take forever of 80,000 US dollars. So that's what I've stated here as well. Now you might then be saying, well, he didn't mean 80,000 every year. He's talking about you increase it in line with inflation. So I don't really know what he meant. So I've got two examples here that I'm going to go through. So let's look at the Ramsey world of a static return. So if you have a fund, we're going to be talking here about having $1 million, or as you can see, £1 million. It's all the same, doesn't matter. So if you've got $1 million and you're drawing down 80,000, if I just show you the next line here, 1 million minus 80 leaves you with 920, but you can see with a return of 12% in the market, that is a change on your investment upwards of 110,000 and a new fund value of 1,030,000. I think in his video it says 1,040,000. I'm not going to be pedantic over that, but that is because you've removed 80, you've had an uplift of 110, the new result is 1,030,000. Year 2, you draw down 80, and so it goes on. So it goes, you know, you can see the fund is actually going up by 30k a year. Let's just run this through for the 30 years and see what happens, because you can see using this approach of a static drawdown of 80,000, then the fund is growing and growing and growing. And in that video, he talks about the fact that by doing what he's talking about, it keeps the fund stable. But doing this, it makes the fund go up to, at the end of your retirement period, i.e. when you cark it, you're left with 7.5 million and you've spent 80,000 per annum. So let's say he wasn't talking about static. He was talking about it increasing in line with that 4% inflation each year. So we're back at the same place. In his world of it being 12% every year and the S&P 500 inflation of 4%, you've got £1 million or $1 million, you draw down 80,000. Okay, does this make sense? 920, yeah, that's exactly the same numbers. But you'll see here, the drawdown has gone up to 83,200 because that is a 4% increase on year 1 of drawdown value of 80,000. We'll move on to year 2 and you can see what we've done. If I show you the formula here, I'm not increasing every year by 4%. I'm increasing G6, which is this cell, by 1.04, which is a 4% inflation increase. So on 83,200, a 4% increase takes us to 86,500. When Dave Ramsey says you can do this forever in a world where there's an S&P 500 of 12% return and inflation of 4%, let's play that through, because I was actually surprised at what I saw here. And that is because you're increasing, as he says, the fund value does start to increase, but then hits critical mass because of the values you're removing from the pot at this point. And then as you can see, it starts to reduce. So you could say, well, that's what Dave Ramsey's getting at, that you don't want to keep adding to the pot, you want to reduce it. Well, you can see here though, that by year 30, you're taking out 249,000 in drawdown, and there's only 282 left in the pot. If I did this for one more year, you will be out of money. So I'm not sure what he means about this, that you can do it forever. Because looking at these numbers, you can't. I'm sure I'm gonna get hammered in the comments for this because I've got something wrong. There's nothing here that I can see that's wrong. You get hold of my spreadsheet and you tell me. So Ramsey's world, if it's static, you're leaving 7 million on the table. If you're going for a cost of living increase of 4%, then if you live 31 years into retirement, you have an issue. But that's in a perfect world. And unfortunately, Dave Ramsey, the world isn't perfect. The S&P 500 doesn't return 12% per annum. Sometimes it returns 30% and sometimes minus 30%. So what I've done to try and help this along a little bit and use some real numbers is using Dave Ramsey's 8% drawdown. I'm going to pick a good year and I'm going to pick a bad year. This is really interesting. So this is 1975, which is a good time to start your retirement. And this is with a static drawdown. So this is where, because he didn't make it clear in his video, this is where you're going to draw down 80,000 every year. That's what I mean, is a static drawdown of 80,000. S&P's gone up by 31%, but inflation is 9%. So, you got to take the rough with the smooth. What happens there? Well, as you know, a million, you take 80 off, you're down to 920,000. But the annual change is an uplift of 290,000, giving you a new fund value of 1.2 million. Fantastic. And the next year, as you can see, the S&P 500 goes up by 19%, and inflation's starting to come down as well to 5.8. You're adding 216,000 to the pot. By the end of that year, you've got 1.34 million. Things are looking good. Let's run this through. So this is a good time to retire. Let's see what happens. Well, you do take the rough with the smooth, because the following year there was an 11.5% drop. Dave Ramsey, it's not 12% every year, it's 31, it's 19, it's minus 11. And at this point, the pot took a hit of 145,000, starting to reduce it. But if we look through, he's right. If you retire in a good year, if you look at the new fund value here, you can see that you're going to be left at the end with 3.8 million, assuming you take $80,000 every year, forever. That's a good year if you're using his static drawdown of 80,000. Now let's look at if you're going to do the same thing with an increase in your drawdown in line with inflation. Inflation is not, unfortunately, always 4%. Here, it's 9, and as you can see down here, it's 1.9, it's 1.6, so that fluctuates. So let's do this with the inflationary aspect as well, and you can see because of an inflation figure of 9%, you've had a good pay rise that year, up to 87,000. Taking Dave Ramsey's view of you can take 80,000 and let's assume that he thinks you can change it for inflation, what does that do when you retire in a good year? By 1991, so that's 16 years, you've run out of cash. You have run out of cash when Dave Ramsey says this is what you should do. What have I got wrong there? Let me know in the comments, because I'm somewhat perplexed. So if this is what he's thinking you can do in a good time, let's look at a bad year. You decided to retire in 1975 on this one. What if you retired in 1973? The S&P 500 went down 17% in the first year. Now, I need to tell you something, because some people will be screaming at their screen at the moment saying, if the S&P is going down 17%, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to wait a couple of years, because as we can see here, in a couple of years, it's 31%. What you're doing there is you're applying a bias based upon what you think the market's going to do in the forthcoming year. Let's look at what happened in 1972 to see whether you would have had the confidence to retire. When 1972, going back to the raw data, the S&P 500 went up 15%. I would say that would give me confidence to retire at that point. I didn't know that in 1973 it was going to drop minus 17. We cannot predict the future. No one can predict the future. Dave Ramsey can't predict the future by saying it's going to go up by 12% every year and inflation is 4%. Every year. Someone starts predicting the future, you need to start listening to somebody different. So now, let's look. 1 million, you take 80,000, you're down to 920, but your investment's taken a hit of 17%. Your new fund value is 760,000, but you're staying static on 80,000, which you can do
forever.
We'll move on a year. Another bad year, because now it goes down 29% and you've taken a hit of 200,000. Now your retirement plan is in tatters, because your million is now worth less than half 2 years later. That's very difficult to recover from. And this is the concept I spoke about in that poker game at the start of this video. This is the concept of sequence of return. If at the start of your retirement you have a poor sequence of return, it can leave you in a difficult position, and that's where you need to make more dynamic decisions on what you do with your money. That's why I put here on the side of the screen, I do not support the 4% rule. I believe it's flawed. Dave Ramsey, in your static drawdown of 80,000, which you can take
forever
in a bad year, you have gone broke in 1984. You've retired for 11 years. That doesn't sound to me great, and that's based on a static 80k. Let's do it on increasing it in line with inflation. So now we got the same drop, 17%, the impact, but we throw caution to the wind. We know we're 160k down, but we're going to increase in line with inflation to 84,960. The following year, we're going to do the same thing. because that seems to be what's recommended. And now, again, we're in tatters. I'll move on one more year, and you can see, even though we've had a year of a return of 31%, well, 31% of 474,000 isn't as great as 31% of a million. So you can see that you're pretty much done for. So let's just show you everything that's here. You've retired for 8 years? An 8-year retirement if you listen to the advice from Dave Ramsey. So he was annoyed, perplexed, frustrated, and he used some fairly interesting language in that video to describe people who talk about the 4% rule. I'm not one of those people, but let's just take that and say, in a good year, 1975, you start retirement, you increase with inflation, and your money is now in year 30, you're taking 150k, you've still got 5 million. The 4% rule's working out here as you would expect it to, because 1975 is a good year. Now let's go to the bad year of 1973, and let's see if we are struggling with this. And you can see the 4% rule in a bad year also doesn't fare well. You get to 1988. At least it's given you 15 years. I think Dave Ramsey had 8 years, so it's given you double the time. What does this leave us with? Well, I'm interested to see the 4% rule in the good year and compare that to the 8% rule. Now, obviously, you can't increase the 8% rule because you run out of retirement. So we're going to have to compare the 4% rule increasing with inflation to Dave Ramsey's 8% rule in a good year with a static drawdown of 80,000. You're withdrawing a total over your 30 years of 2.4 million. Let me just make a note of that here. 2.4 million is what, using the Dave Ramsey 8% rule without increasing it for inflation. Let's compare that to the 40,000 increasing, and you're spending there 2.9 million. So in fact, when Dave Ramsey is talking about the fact that people who speak about the 4% rule, they're underspending their pot. Well, actually, people using the 4% rule, if they're comparing to anything that he talks about that could work, because that is the only thing I can seem to work out that does work for him, you're actually spending a lot more than the 8% rule. Let me know in the comments below if you find this kind of video interesting. Are you interested in drawdown strategies? I prefer a much more dynamic approach to drawdown, and there are many strategies out there. If that's something you're interested in, let me know. Remember, sign up to that newsletter and you'll get this spreadsheet. You can play around with it. I believe that Dave Ramsey would do well to re-record that video and to say, I don't normally get angry. I'm not normally that bullish. We're to go Rome. Our dream is world travel. What's yours?